So today I want to review the controversial Sidney Poitier film In the Heat of the Night. And this is definitely a very, very interesting film, especially with how it's really the last film that Sidney Poitier has ever done in his career that ever was super popular. Yes, he went on to do They Call Me Mr. Tibbs, but that didn't do well in the box office. So this was kind of like the last, time ever he was a very, very popular and over actor. Like this kind of was like the last big film of his career. And I think that there's a lot of interesting reasons why that is, including like the deep-seated Hollywood racism. In the Heat of the Night is based on a crime novel, and it's about this murder that happens down south and in Mississippi. So Virgil Tibbs is called to take care of it, and there's also this really racist cop down there. So this cop, what happens is that Tibbs is like hanging out somewhere, and then he's automatically accused because he has money on him of the murder. And it was one of those things that he was arrested without habeas corpus and other like legal methods. And then they kind of find out, that he actually came down from Philadelphia to help these guys out, and he does that through the film. But there's a lot of different things I want to just talk about. I think that In the Heat of the Night, it is the first film that's really a new Hollywood film. So it was very gritty. It was very violent. It had a lot of sexual content. And it also had, it showed a part of America that was gritty and ugly. There are some films like The Little Tramp that did that in the 1940s, showing like how people suffered during the Depression. But a lot of times in American cinema, they really didn't show that. There was kind of like there was the Hays Code, and there were other like like ethics that went on, and that was like, we want to show America, red, white, and blue, proud and true. We don't want to show the ugly parts, especially because like after World War II, there was a bunch of American pride. And films like this, studios wouldn't like that, but it was based on a very bestseller book. So a lot of people kind of said because the book sold well, the movie will sell well. So they got some leeway to do this, and they showed like the South as deeply racist, very violent, and then also just very, very politically corrupt. And definitely, not a lot of those films were made. Midnight Cowboy became, right now, what is usually considered the first, but it was the second film in history that was kind of that gritty neo-realism. And then you had The French Connection. You had Chinatown, even though it was not, it didn't win Best Picture. It was an allegory for the corruption and politics. Then you had The Deer Hunter, and you had Kramer versus Kramer, and then it kind of died out in the 80s, so you had a lot of films from 1967 all the way until 1980, which showed the gritty underbelly of America that won Best Picture and inspired other films like A Panic in Needle Park, The Warriors, Taxi Driver, and a lot of other ones, Get Carter, which were these violent, very, very edgy films, showing like an ugly part of American or world society. And it's important because we can't always because if you're trying to show a narrative, because a lot of like Hollywood studios would show a narrative like the country's really great, but they will not show how other people kind of suffer. So that's why this film was very important, and it really allowed films like Midnight Cowboy to be made with more mature content. And I also will say that another thing that's big about the film is that, it was filmed very well. I love the cinematography. The editing was done very well. How they did a lot of smash cuts, which it's like, if something's really quiet, it cuts to something really loud, or it cuts to something intense. Like people are talking, they're talking about visiting, they talk about visiting this business person owns a plantation. So Virgil and the officer are talking about it. Then it shows a cut to a piece of cotton being like mauled in a cotton gin. In the opening scene, you see a fly in a wall, and then it cuts to a person using a rubber band to kill it. And there are other scenes like that in the movie where it kind of cuts to where you see something kind of interesting or kind of creepy or intense, but then but then like it gets into what the scene's actually about. Sometimes they say you always go to a new scene with an establishing shot, but sometimes but in this film they don't really do that. They do more of something interesting or a close up of something, just because it's supposed to make you just understand that there's a lot of intensity in every aspect of this of the South and this world that they're in. And I also want to talk about and the cinematography was really good. There was a lot of handheld shots that was very uncommon during this time. There were a lot of zooms, and there was things like car chases and fight scenes, so they filmed that very, very well. But definitely a lot of handheld, and it was very it was just new at the time, like the cinema verite style. So it was definitely a huge innovator in cinematography, and also how they did a lot of the night shots with telephoto lenses. The background is this deep dark black, but also the foreground, you see these city lights, not a lot of them, so it always created a feeling of you're in the South. It's dangerous to be a black man in the South, and violence can happen anywhere. Sorry, there was just a bird on my windowsill. Yeah, I thought it was a rat or something like that. But I digress. So the cinematography was really great. The acting was really great. The directing, what they chose as far as to put into the film for a story was great. The other thing that I'm going to say is that I'm going to talk about the controversies of this film. I think that I don't remember his name, but I think it was Robert Rod Sterling, if I have it correct. Who played the racist officer? He won Best Actor. And then Sidney Poitier was nominated for Golden Globe, but he was but he was never nominated for an Oscar for this. And then also his acting was kind of the most standout of this film. But I do understand his character was very monotone. He was always just about trying to get his job done, whereas the police officer, he went through a lot of just character growth. Being racist against Tibbs. Only caring about Tibbs because of political gains. Also just having a epiphany where he feels comfortable enough with Tibbs to invite Tibbs to his house. Saying that, okay, well, Tibbs, you're a black guy. Don't you want to stay and solve this case because it's good for your people. It makes your people look smart and whatever. So he was always battling his, racism. Because he wanted Tibbs to work with him in the sense of keeping Tibbs, and it kind of evolved to him saying, you know what, it's friendship, not me tolerating this person because because the person who was murdered, his wife was if you guys don't solve the case or you don't pick this black guy who knows how to be a great asset to you, I'm gonna take my construction business and take it out of town. And so for political gains and to make everybody happy, this police officer decided to keep Virgil Tibbs around to help him out, just for the benefit of the town. But in the end of the day, he never really cared about him until the very, very end. And so I kind of see the character dimensions, but it was also kind of very disturbing that Sidney Poitier, if he was nominated for Best Actor, I would kind of feel good about it, but he was never. And I think that there's a couple of reasons. Obviously Hollywood racism. In this film, there's this very famous scene where where a white guy slaps him, and then he slaps him back. And that was very shocking because in a lot of old movies, if a white person slaps a black person, they had to suck it up and take it and be like, yes, boss, and whatever. And that shocked a lot of people. So I think that the Oscars just felt that was too far. And then also, Sidney Poitier did Lilies of the Field, and in that film, he was building a church for these white nuns, and he was like cheated out of pay. Then he kind of just does it out of the kindness of his own heart, and then he does it, and then they run out of supplies, so he actually gets a job. They're not the lead nun is not that grateful, and at the very end of the film, he leaves town. It doesn't go to the opening ceremony or the opening mass for all the hard work that he put in. So it was almost like, how can Sidney Poitier win Best Actor for a film where he was basically being a nigger, a slave plantation nigger? He was doing all this stuff for these white people, including a lot of free labor, and he was never really thanked at the end. He just left town, just singing a Bible song. So almost like what happened in the slave plantations, where despite all the abuse that you got, you were singing and praising to Jesus about your struggles and your ties to feel better. But and in the heat of the night, he kind of played a black man that didn't take shit from anybody, was progressive, was more educated than a lot of people. Somebody slaps him, he slaps him back. So, he was not awarded for portraying a progressive black man, but when he was like the house nigger, slave nigger black man, and I'm not saying in a racist way, but I'm saying in the context of those times, no, you're not allowed. No, we can't nominate that. So it is kind of one of the most primal examples of Hollywood racism and Oscar racism. But I will say that the only thing that was bad about his performance, that was very one dimensional, because he played one emotion throughout, which is, I want to get this job done, and I have to kind of just understand that there's a lot of bullshit that's going to stop me because I'm black in Dixieland. So it is very sad, and it's also very, very sad because, again, Hollywood racism. Sidney Poitier did not have a career after this film. He was in a lot of different films, but he never had a lead role. He never had anything Oscar worthy. He never had anything talked about until Barack Obama gave him like a presidential honor, and then he died. He became more of like wow, he's done a lot of great things and he should be studied. That really didn't happen until Obama. So for a period of like 30 years, he was really irrelevant, and that's very, very sad. And I always kind of question, is it because the role went too far in a very, very racist country? And I hate saying this, but I am a biracial man. I look black. I've dealt with racism in the film business. I'm a filmmaker from Connecticut. I remember the first time I did the 40-hour film project in Connecticut, in New Haven. People were looking at me and saying, it's great that we have a black man this year. And then I did some other films in Connecticut where people were saying, this black director, Byron's the black guy. So, and I was bullied. I was kind of growing up and trying to learn skills. But I remember, like, a lot of times, even in my own career, I was treated differently because of the color of my skin. And I definitely dealt with cyberbullying with people in the 40-hour film project. I definitely dealt with that thing about, people want me to be successful, but I have to deal with a white guy that's going to be my mentor, going to guide me, going to yell at me, going to scream at me, going to bully me until I kind of say, okay, well, I can't do a project without him being my white savior or my white mentor. So if I win awards in Connecticut or other places, I can say that white man helped me out. That white man is responsible for my greatness. No brown person in cinematic history can be great without the touch of the white man. So I've also gotten destroyed and bullied, and people talking shit about me in the Connecticut film business, because it is definitely very racist in Connecticut. So even in my own experience, I'm sorry to make things about me. I'm working on it. It's a bad habit, but there are a lot of times where if you try to be progressive and you are brown skin or you look black, you're destroyed unless you can give a white person credit, or unless you fit certain stereotypes, like you go on television and say, I'm black, but I had a lot of white teachers, or I didn't have a father, my mother raised me, or I'm gay, I'm effeminate, or you know what? It's a film about the time I was treated badly by police. There's always in this country, there's always kind of like, you cannot be black and successful unless you fit into a certain like asterisk. And I think when you look at In the Heat of the Night and just what happened to Sidney Poitier afterwards, it's barbarically tragic. And it's definitely very, very sad. And it's very, very sad because he could have progressed African American cinema and world cinema like nothing else. The black exploitation films came. Definitely was a very, very tragic end to one of the best actors and one of the most influential actors in American history. And I think the last thing that I would say is that it makes me think of The Devil Finds Work, the famous James Baldwin essay. And there's a line in it where he says, if you treat black people or any other filmmaker like the best version of themselves, you allow them to be the best that they can be. You don't limit them because of racism. You do not treat black actors. You do not treat black filmmakers. You do not treat anybody black in the film business. You don't treat any black directors like a nigger, like a nigger, like a nigger. The film business would be centuries ahead of where it's now. So, when I look at In the Heat of the Night, it is really tragic just what happened to Sidney Poitier and how he didn't really recover and could it have been because his role was too progressive in a very white supremacist country. I think that's the reason, but I also kind of feel that's not the only reason. And it's really interesting when you see an actor play a racist police officer win an Oscar for best actor, and you see a progressive black man in the same film who has the most charismatic acting and charisma counts, and he's not even nominated. It is a signifier of American racism. But I think that this is a very, very controversial film. And because it is controversial, because of the aftermath, it being controversial and how it's treated in Oscar seasons, it is one of the most important films in American history and probably the most important film in American history regarding racism on screen and off screen.